Okay, folks, thanks so much. Oh, that's a lovely photo. I might have photobombed you. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Well, folks, we're going to continue to build on this morning's conversations and a next panel, the future of innovation, cutting edge tech and over the horizon opportunities. And we're going to address some of the really unprecedented waves of technological innovation and their ripples across society, the economy, human production. As we all know and we experience in our daily lives, the world is increasingly defined by a state of hyperconnectivity and hypercomplexity, in which things like the development of sensors and connected devices is really driving the datafication and the quantification of human existence, in which biotechnology is really beginning to shift into high gear, and in which the convergence of seemingly unrelated areas of science and technology creating a new kind of innovation space, leading to innovations at the intersections of disciplines and domains. And as we've already heard this morning, there are even more transformations on the horizon: general AI, quantum science, genomic technologies, human augmentation, materials by design. So today, I'm going to be welcoming up a distinguished panel of experts to discuss some of the implications of these emerging technologies, the opportunities they might present, and of course, perhaps some of the challenges they pose and how we might overcome those. And we're going to explore how these technologies can in some sense be leveraged and where can they be leveraged in our towns, our cities, our communities. So I'd like to ask my panelists to join me on the stage. First up, the Deputy Director for Science and Technology at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and the other new co-chair of our Technology Leadership and Strategy Initiative, the Honorable Pat Falcone. Hi, Pat. The Chief Technology Officer of HP Federal at HP Inc., and our co-chair of the Council's Advanced Computing Roundtable, Tommy Gardner. Thank you, Tommy. I'd also like to welcome up to the stage the Global Head of Technology Partnership Development at the Bank of America, Tom Mildenhall. Hey, Tom, thanks for being with us. The Vice Provost for Research and Innovation at Vanderbilt University, Padma Raghavan, and the President and CEO of the Accelerator for America, Mary Ellen Wiederwald. We're all here. Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so given the picture I just painted in those opening remarks, folks, I want to just jump right in. I'm going to ask a general question. I'm going to give you a little bit of heads up. Pat, I'm going to come to you first, and then Tommy, but it's going to be open up to everyone. How can stakeholders across the United States and across our entire innovation ecosystem, and that's everything from universities to labs, from the shop floor to businesses, stay ahead of the curve that I just talked about, that technological curve, that ever-accelerating pace of technology? How can we do that? How can we as a nation, in some sense, anticipate and be more forward-looking and proactive? So, Pat, if you don't mind.
Well, thank you very much. Well, let's see, how can we stay ahead? I mean, I think maybe the first thing is really acknowledging just how much fun we have when we have the privilege to work in these fields. And I think maybe we don't always talk about that enough. And we talk about STEM a lot as though it's hard and but I think it's so meaningful what the kinds of problems that we can bring the tool set to and the ability to work with lots of folks. So maybe the most important thing is the country really needs to make sure that our kids, are educated. They have to know how to read and they have to know how to write and think, but they've got to have numeric fluency, right, and some computational skills. And so we have to ensure that that's there. And then we really just have to get at it, do everything and be super positive.
I love that idea of sort of telling this sort of the story. Why does innovation matter for our lives? And so, Tommy, maybe you can weigh in. HP has been a long-time leader in this space.
We've been 85 years starting Silicon Valley, and why it is what it is today. So I'm proud to be part of that organization, and it's very creative, very innovative. A difference in hierarchical structure that most companies spawn. HP has been matrixed all along, very flat organizationally. And I think that's helping our communication and in our innovation, where you can go to anybody and talk to anybody, and you don't have to have permissions to go up a chain, but go directly. But Patrick is right. It is foundational to have the educational background, to have the educational incentives in order to be creative. And we have a culture in our country of being creative, of not restricting people, allowing ideas to flow and flourish. And in examples that you see in Silicon Valley and you've seen through the AT&T Bell Labs 50, 100 years ago, and through the history of America, ever since we became a country, that is a culture that we need to maintain and update. But it's the scouting that I think is what drives innovation and drives things forward. You brought up earlier today my beloved New England Patriots and their excellence in winning Super Bowls, but
That wasn't me.
that really is critical to know who the talent is and where you find them, and being able to locate and nourish and feed that talent to encourage them to continue. And once you've recognized the talent and see the work in the research labs, to see the work that's in the different small businesses, and even in the government labs, like Pat, you're involved with a lot of innovative ideas to get that nourished and into industry where they can create products and increase our GDP. At the end of the day, it's an economics problem, but it doesn't work without the people finding the talent.
Well, let's stay there for a minute, though. So Padma and Mary Ellen and Tom, I'd love to bring you in on this. Pat and Tommy have said, okay, we've got to tell a story. We've got to somehow attract and maintain and retain and, in some sense, grow talent. So I'd love to hear, Padma, I'd love to hear about a university, Vanderbilt, you're doing amazing things. Tom, I'd love to hear a little bit about Bank of America. You're scanning, yes, California and the United States, but also the world for the best and brightest and their ideas. And Mary Ellen, well, I don't want to sort of spoil our future conversation, but ultimately people is about place. So where are we seeing this talent coming from? So, but Padma, over to you first.
Okay, great. So it's really about people and the talent, right? But it's also about how are we educating them? And I think computing is at the heart of it. You know, call it AI, call it software, call it data, whatever you want to call it, right? That's the convergence factor here. And that's at the heart of what's driving multi-sector innovation. You know, all the speakers spoke about the gap between energy supply and demand in this net zero carbon world. Well, computing can help you drive up the efficiency of how you consume, and that means you're closing the gap. Computing is at the heart of other things, right? Other technologies that we are seeing that are having broad implications for health. We are able to peer inside cells and know how we are aging and be able to stop that. And so we're going beyond curing disease to wellness across the lifespans. We're talking about education, how it changes everything. But most importantly, I think we have to understand that this computing, it's like everywhere, all at once. It's not yet Oscar worthy because it's not everything. It'll never be everything, but it is in everything. And so I think when we look to educating the future, not only do we have to educate people to be creative, to be entrepreneurial in STEM fields, but also educate them in understanding how computing is permeating all of society and how it's changing the way we do business and how we learn, how we create, and how we drive businesses forward.
Tom, I wonder if you could maybe tease out a little bit, because Padma's just made the point that computing is part of this underlying tapestry that really forms this innovation ecosystem. I'd love to hear what you're seeing in terms of talent, challenges, opportunities, and what we could do better as a nation to really ensure that we have that next generation innovator, entrepreneur here, developing, deploying, creating value.
Yeah. So I think it's a really fascinating question. I think at a company, one thing you have to start with is, can you create a culture where there's the right amount of risk taking? You see that in Silicon Valley, but at big companies like B of A, it's a lot harder to do that. So can you create a culture where this just maintaining the status quo isn't all that people are incentivized to do? And that's like with the incentive structure. And then I think as a company, you need to figure out ways to stay in touch with what's going on and what's out there. That will help you develop talent in that area. Also, to help you retain talent. If you don't have employees who are working on not the most cutting edge, but new innovative things, they won't want to stick around, right? It becomes a retention risk that they're not working with new things. So you're reskilling them, and so keeping track of that stuff and knowing what's going on is really important as a company. So like cloud computing is one small example where everything we're doing, development and infrastructure, is moving to the cloud, and a lot of your current employees do on-premise coding, and it's very different. And so we have to stay on top of that and make sure that our employees are reskilled, retrained, and we provide. And so I think that's one thing that's become important is, as big companies, are you providing that education to your own employees via many different ways so that they can stay up to date? And then again, also it becomes a retention benefit for them to stay up to date.
Well, Tom, do you mind if I just maybe go just a little bit more specific? We at the council are very lucky that Brian Moynihan is our chairman and CEO, Bank of America. He often talked about the tremendous pivot that Bank of America had to make at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. 40,000 I'm going to get the number wrong, but
Yep.
tens of thousands of laptops suddenly to workers who were not, at their office space at a pace and scale a company has never done before. Could you talk maybe about some of the lessons that you all learned in this experience with this pandemic and where you're going to be going forward to ensure that you remain robust, resilient, sustainable, and at that cutting edge of technology?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I worked for our CTO, and we sent 40,000 people home with laptops. We had to also acquire them, which I think many of you in this room probably faced that kind of challenge. Where did you get all those laptops? So I think one
From
thing
Tommy.
yes, from these guys. They're our friends, yeah. There's another company too. So I think one thing a lot of companies learned is that you could do it pretty well from home. There were some things you needed to make sure were in place, and some of that had to grow significantly to do that. But I think that's one thing you learned is people could do a pretty good job from home. So that was a big takeaway. And I think you learned also that to the point of technology, you needed good technology to do that. And there are things that need to be put in place. Like, for example, Zoom was something that was critical that we did not have, and it also was not secure. Right. And we worked very closely with Eric Yuan at Zoom to make sure that his product was up to snuff for us in terms of security, right? So it required things like that and partnerships like that to do it. And I think that, going forward, I think the lessons are that you have a very adaptable workforce that if you give them better technology, they can perform their jobs even better and more efficiently. And they like that, and they're able to use that. And so I think it teaches you that, can you teach more people to use Python or Java, and could they do their jobs better? And so I think there's a lot there to learn. And then also you had a lot of employees who were able to shift jobs and do something completely different with the right amount of training, so they could do call center stuff from home. We had people doing that as well from branches.
One of the things that Bank of America does better than anybody in the world is cybersecurity.
Yes.
And if you think about it, the financial incentives of protecting data in an institution like Bank of America is probably so strong, you have to be the best in the world.
Yes. So just before, in terms of numbers, just so people know, we spend about $1 billion a year just on cybersecurity, which is a public number, and we use over 300 different software providers just to do that. So it's very complex. We obviously face attacks at a scale that most people don't in the private sector. So,
Well, Tom, you mentioned people suddenly had the ability to think about changing jobs or using. But Mary Ellen, one of the other things we experienced is people started to think about they could change where they lived, they could change where they worked, still being at the cutting edge of innovation and technology development. So I'm wondering, could you share a little bit about the lessons that you all have learned, and in fact, you all have been, in some sense, driving at Accelerator for America. What does it mean today to be in a place where you innovate?
It means you live in a city. That's where all good things happen. Accelerator for America is a national nonprofit organization that works with mayors and senior leaders in communities to deal with some of the most pressing challenges facing our cities and her residents. We work primarily in economic development and transit and infrastructure. And so we're at the center of a lot of things right now. And of course, 80% of America's population resides in urban areas, and 90% of our economic output comes from urban areas. So probably all of you are working in an urban area today. We're seeing a lot of prognostication right now about what's happening in cities. And clearly we're in a state of dynamism in cities because of the remote work phenomenon primarily. And it's just another kind of change. People who are overly pessimistic about this clearly haven't read history. It's just change. It's inevitable. And so, yes, our central business districts are changing. They're different than they were. They're not vibrant the way they were because people aren't coming into the office 40 hours per week. This, of course, is also having a significant impact on our public transit systems. We've got to deal with that. Ridership is off by about 50%, and that unfortunately creates this sort of snowball rolling downhill problems with our transit systems in terms of homeless and crime issues and things like that. So we've got to get back ahead of that because I guarantee you the path to prosperity is not in a single occupancy vehicle. And the other thing about our place is that we have to be ready for the change. A decade ago, as autonomous vehicles were this thing we were talking about, city leaders were scrambling to think we had to redesign our cities in order to figure out AVs and what were we going to do with our right-of-way and new technology. And then, of course, the technology got so good we didn't have to redesign our cities. We just have to get used to it ourselves. So there are all of these things that are happening, everything we'll talk about up here as we get into our futurist role, most of it will happen in a city. It will happen in a place, and then it will happen to the people who live in that place as well. And we have to think about all of those subsequent impacts.
Well, you hinted that we're going to look into our crystal balls a little bit here. So I'd like to do that now. And Tom, maybe I'm going to come to you and work the way down. You're scanning the world for great new ideas to invest in. You're looking for ways to support entrepreneurs and innovators. What are you seeing over the horizon that maybe we are not yet talking about, or maybe we are, but maybe not enough, where you see competitive advantage accruing to the U.S. if we begin to get some of the things right that we've been talking about in the panel's discussions earlier today? That we've got the regulatory regime right, we've got standards right, we've got our trade positioning right, we've got investments and research and development. If we somehow were to get all of those elements right, how could we leverage that to what end?
Well, it's a great question. I think, in Silicon Valley, first of all, you have a lot of stuff that's being built that is not useless, but it's like social media, right? So that's not in that ballpark. Does it save the world or help the world much? So that's.
I didn't tweet that.
I didn't either. So I think in the realm of this stuff, I think everyone's heard of ChatGPT now. We put together stuff for Brian about it. I think you're going to see something really interesting around the cost to produce content in the world goes really low. Like there are companies now where you can type in text and it will do text to video. So think about being able to type something in, it literally will create a video from scratch out of thin air. So that kind of ability to do things like that, and you add that with music and other things, it's pretty wild what you can do. So that's an interesting, weird one that who knows where that goes.
But it's a great idea because, I think people always forget one of our top global exports is entertainment.
Yep.
We do thrive there.
Yeah, so the cost for someone doing something in a video game or music or something goes low enough you can do it with an iPhone, right? Instead of millions and millions of dollars. I think the AI space is huge. I think you'll see that embedded in a lot of industries, and you're already seeing that. I think it'll become a differentiator in software across all different spaces, whether it's cyber or data or anywhere else. And then I think the other one I kind of keep my finger in is I think quantum was mentioned. I'm not an expert in quantum, but I think the U.S. has the ability to maybe still be a leader there. And then I think the last one I'd say is space. I heard something today that there's a company that has a rocket now that's I think 80% or 75% 3D printed that just went up into space. And so I think there's a lot of potential in those areas. And I think AI is something maybe not separate, but almost like a layer on top of all that, that's making it all more automated and faster and better. And so I think those are a couple areas that come to mind that I see out there.
Well, space is interesting, and in fact, we'll hear from Ed Bolton later today and over the course of 2 days from colleagues from Aerospace Corporation on that point and this privatization. And of course, we have colleagues here from Lockheed who can talk about that as well. But Pat, maybe I'll put you a little bit on the spot, but mainly because in December, and we've already heard a little bit about this, there was a seminal development at your lab, fusion. What's that all about? How are you all taking that moment in time and moving forward, and how are you all thinking about that opportunity, but then maybe also what else at the lab that we don't maybe hear about every day that might be of interest to the U.S. as we think about the next 20 to 30 to 50 years?
Well, thanks. We certainly are celebrating with a whole set of colleagues, and it somehow happened on one day in December of 2022, but it's been 60 years coming. So I think it really gets to a point about another factor in the importance of innovation and our innovation ecosystem is persistence.
And Steve
right?
Ashby mentioned that this morning.
We've
You
really
have to-
got to stick with it.
consistent investment.
Yeah, the steady investment, I think, is what he focused on, but I think just the existence of investment and the staying power. And of course, that was also true for LIGO, the Gravity Wave Observatory, where it wasn't working and there were ideas about making it, and we doubled down and then it worked. So I think, this is an incredible experimental result. But it's also, evidence of just how complicated things are. I mean, more complicated maybe than social media or whatever. But the fact is, when we're talking about materials, when we're talking about unusual conditions, when we're talking about trying to do something different and the kinds of problems that we spoke about this morning with energy and sustainability, the fact is there's a lot of hard work to do. It's not straightforward. I do think that, computing really helps us understand. We are big in the business of, trying to write equations for tiny, tiny parts of any kind of material, of, in all sorts of phases, gas phases, solid materials, that in-between space with plasmas and ions. And and I think AI is enabling things. What we see at our laboratory and the family of laboratories that we're part of, and university researchers, is that, we really have been in this interplay for understanding between exquisite instrumentation and really fancy experiments and nice facilities and computational models. What AI we really see is bringing in a third pillar, that it allows us to use computation to give us data sets that then tells us something about experimentation, about which experiments that we seem to have better understanding of and which ones we have less understanding, and which are the most important experiments to do next. And similarly, it can take extraordinarily complex calculations that still take lots and lots of time and kind of speed it up. AI can allow interpolation inside existing regions, which then allows us to ask even more complicated questions. So I agree with you, computing for the purpose of computation, or the computing for the purpose of doing these AI simulations and the algorithms, creating data sets, using data sets, are leveraging in every single area, and that's where the new things are going to come. I do think that materials, biomaterials, we're doing just a lot of interesting things, but fundamentally, everybody needs to have that hat on of, yes, we're going to use modeling and simulation, we're going to use AI, machine learning, Bayesian approaches. I mean, there's different kinds of AI, of course, and then we're going to actually make things and see what happens. So with those kind of three pillars and basic science, understanding optics, that's the key phenomenon for our fusion results, but it's also the kinds of things that we're making and taking into space to be able to bring some differentiating capabilities. So it's all these pieces. I don't think they're different pieces than we thought, but it's how they come together and how bright minds that come with deep expertise in these different areas, a chemist and a mathematician, using the same kind of tools, but also that pull for mission need also helps.
Well, you've teased a lot of points here. One of the things that strikes me is, and we learned this from you, Pat, and from Tommy, and from other leaders in our Advanced Computing Roundtable and our High Performance Computing Advisory Committee over the past 15 years, is the ability to use these tools of science to innovate the innovation process. And you've just described an even deepening process, Pat, now with the overlay of AI and perhaps quantum going forward. But Tommy, maybe you could weigh in here, and I'd love to hear from your perspective. Your look forward. I'm not going to try to drive the conversation, but you're a big leader in sustainability. You're obviously in computation. So, but over to you.
We do 3D print, and we even do gaming. So we're pretty broad in what we do at HP. Got into the healthcare field because we're so knowledgeable in microfluidics, putting little drops of ink on paper, 8 billion drops per second on our industrial printer in the right location at the right one of 5 million colors is just a control system problem that's, defies the laws of physics in some respect. But I had the privilege of working at NIF for 3 years when I first got out of the Navy. And probably one of the more important things I've done is work on something that had never been done before. Nobody had a clue what it would cost. And that worried the devil out of Congress. You know, when are you going to be done? Well, when it's finished, and we'll let you know. But the faith that Ed Moses, who was the director at the time, put into, we can't do this, and we don't know what it's going to cost, but please trust us for the advance that this will come, is probably going to be one of the bigger inventions and investments that this country's made this century. I have worked at Quantum, and I'm more interested from HP's perspective in the quantum information science and the technologies that are involved there than the quantum computing, which is still a few years away. We'll see when that comes too. It's kind of like the NIF. We invest and invest, and one day we trust it will happen. But the area, I think, where the differentiation and the competitiveness in the U.S. is in our ethics. It's in our attitudes. It is our belief and framework that we have colloquially as a country in doing the right thing. And that is our biggest advantage. I taught at Catholic universities on Monday nights, and last semester was a course in cyber ethics. Not many people really even think of ethics when they think of cyber, because a lot of it that happens out in the real world is unethical. But in that course, we talked about autonomous vehicles, and we talked about the impact that if you have 40,000 lives lost on U.S. highways on an annual basis. It used to be more, but people aren't driving the same way they did pre-COVID. And if you could create a law that says everybody has to drive in autonomous vehicles, and only 10,000 lives were lost, and you save 30,000 lives a year, is it unethical not to create that law? Now, who knows whether the number is 5,000 or 15,000, but if you believe that fewer lives will be lost with the machines doing the decision-making and not falling asleep or not drinking on the roadway, would that be the right choice? And I think at the end of the day, our country is going to do the ethical thing. They're going to do what's right for the people and the citizens. And not all governments work that way. So that's our future.
Marilyn, you want to hop in? Yeah.
Really started talking about how government works. It felt like a good time to jump into the conversation. Like the council, Accelerator lives at sort of the intersection of the public sector and the private sector. And we're talking a lot here today and tomorrow about the innovations to come and how we accelerate 10x on that. We still have a lot of technology and innovation we haven't even put to use in America, or good use. We have 2 initiatives right now in cities, one with Honeywell and our Smart City Accelerator, and another with Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners we just announced earlier this year, called I3, the Innovative Infrastructure Initiative, where we are trying to take cities in a cohort approach into greater depth of use of technology. Most cities have decent technology these days. Many of them even have chief innovation officers, chief data officers. These are great things that have come along in the last decade, but there are so many demands on the city budget and the time of city leaders. A lot of times these things just kind of, get back onto the back burner and they reside there for a long time. So that's what we're trying to do, is pull those things forward, give these city leaders a safe space in which to learn and to grow, to try these things out. Is at our core, what we're doing is trying to find and develop real-time solutions for cities. We talked a lot about people as well. And so let's go into the people side for just a moment. I'm going to get in my Wayback Machine. 2 jobs ago, I was leading economic and community development for my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. And Louisville is historically a manufacturing logistics town, like a lot of cities in the middle of America. And Brookings Metro published a report in 2018 that laid out the top 10 cities most at risk for automation. Cities love top 10 lists. We love being best at tourism, best at number of jobs at it, best bourbon. This was the top 10 list Louisville didn't want to be on. 8th city in the country most at risk for loss of jobs from automation. And everybody freaked out. What are we going to do about that? And of course, this is true for many mid-sized cities, many American cities who aren't on the coast, who aren't the top 5 cities that get all of the innovation dollars. And so the vast majority of America has a serious workforce development problem that we have to get after. And cities are going to be the places where that occurs, and partnerships are going to be the way that we win at that. And so we've got to really double down on workforce training in this country. We've got to focus at the top level, getting more people trained up to do the innovating, and then we've really got to drive hard at a retraining scenario for our country. We are not doing this at scale. What we devote to workforce development in this country is ridiculously small. And so we've got to get really serious about that and recognize it's going to take investments at the local, state, and federal level to take us where we need to be.
Well, that last point, Mary Ellen, is important, and Deborah knows this story. Well, she helped to define and articulate, and well, it's well over 10 years ago, this disconnect between economic development, workforce investment. So this also gets to the point I think Deborah raised earlier about a more systemic approach at the national level as we think about all these issues. So that I'm glad you pulled that back.
It's something we've got to get mixed in. Of all the wonderful federal investments for the last couple of years, we really haven't seen a lot for workforce or housing. And that goes straight at the heart of the middle of America.
Padma, could I come to you? Mary Ellen talked about Louisville. You're in Nashville. Vanderbilt's the engine. I mean, there are also great companies and great hospitals. But talk a little bit about what you see as the opportunity in a place like Nashville to drive over the horizon opportunities. But before I let you answer, I will ask one final question of everyone. So everyone else, you get to think a little bit while Padma's talking, but you have to listen to her too. We're going to end the panel with your one thing you think that Council on Competitiveness must focus on in 2023 to prepare the next presidential campaigns for future based on innovation. But Padma, over to you first.
So Nashville, right? I mean, what do I say about it, right? There's Chat GPT and so on, and it's going to do a lot for media, but it's probably going to put some country music songwriters out of business. Let's set that aside for the time being. But if you look beyond that, and to your question on cities and workforce, right? I think we really have to focus a lot on and just bear with me for harping about computing and AI. We really have to focus on that edge between people and computing. That's where, it's the opportunity multiplier. It can give us that 10x in innovation, but it's the other side. What about the risks around that? Because if you don't do human-centric design, the risks are just enormous, right? And just where there's opportunity, in Nashville, there's opportunity around driving the health sector forward. There is opportunity in driving the defense sector forward, especially around dual-use technologies. There is opportunity in driving the energy sector forward, right? Given that Tennessee's got clean energy being produced by TVA, and there's Oak Ridge and so on. That the opportunity is there in 10x, but there's also the risk. And I think this is where I think we need to be very thoughtful as a nation, and also in the sense of coordination that we bring here. It's not risk that cannot be overcome, but it's risk that needs to be understood. And it's risk that needs to be examined, because when AI comes to a decision, it doesn't come to a decision from the same sense of understanding that we have. There's no way to validate it. There isn't any way to even quantify, put uncertainty bars around it. And so I think we need to think a little bit from that perspective. But if you set that aside, I think multi-sector innovation that's driven by IT in some form, AI, I think is here to stay. It's certainly there to stay in Nashville, but it's there to stay around the world. But I think we have to also think a little bit about that human-computing interface very thoughtfully and get ahead of it, not wait for something to happen. And I think we're seeing some early warnings there, right? The Boeing Max, for example, that was a small little glitch that manifested itself because the system was designed, looking to how pilots operated the Boeing before the system was in place versus what happens afterwards. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Padma. Okay, our closing lightning round. Tom, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first. A thought, a challenge, a provocation to our community, what we should focus on for the coming year.
I keep hearing this word, and I think I would say partnership. And I guess just to put a finer point on it, I've worked in Silicon Valley for Bank of America for like 12 years. And one thing I've noticed is that the more we share the problems we have, the more they're able to solve those problems, and the more they know about them. So they can't solve problems if they don't know about them. So I guess my point in partnership would be that if you have more groups like the people in this room talking more openly about the problems they have, the needs they have, also the technology they're building, I think you'd be surprised how much there is out there that could be utilized already, and good ideas could come together. I think there's assumption that like you can't share that stuff, but the reality is the execution is where the differentiation is. So I think that partnership in a much more, and the more and more open you can make it, I think the more you could create. That's probably a little bit, I think there's probably a lot left on the table there.
Tommy.
Let me build on what Tom just said. It's the economics, I think, that's critical to get right. And I look at the quantum field, where you mentioned Silicon Valley, the communication and the coagulation of thought and ideas, with nobody caring who gets credit, and nobody really cared in the early days of the computer system. They wanted to move the market, and that's what created Silicon Valley. Today you can do that, and you don't have to be in one place. And in the quantum field, the government's supporting commerce through NIST, the Quantum Economic Development Council, 126 companies working together to create a market for all these things other than a quantum computer, although that's on the table, that you can do with this science. And so it's the economics. You complain, or you hear the complaint, that we don't want the government picking winners and losers. And there's some validity in that. But we have to have smart investment from government, and smart investment in the right direction. Maybe not the specific company that wins and loses, but in the right fields that are going to move our economy forward. So I see the right focus for the next presidential election is those can provide the best economic platform for our people. That candidate's going to win.
Pat.
Well, I wanted to go on the same topic. So partnerships, I do think that that's really where an important emphasis for advancing innovation is. I would say in particular that I think the government has to be more open to experiments, partnership experiments. So I think we don't exactly know the right ways to structure partnerships, and we've talked about intellectual property processes, but I do think that we need to try some different things. So there's got to be a space for more experimentation. And one place that I could see that we, for example, could be more engaged is I think that as we're looking at new technologies, particularly in advanced energy and, say, carbon capture, carbon sequestration technologies, and it was mentioned this morning about people having to accept the new technologies. Well, there's also the understanding, but there's also the job training, right? So I think that as we're thinking about investments in higher development prototypes, that we should also have training programs right at the same places where we're bringing people that will be part of the new jobs. But, you know, if, for example, that would require partnerships with people that work on prototyping technologies, the educational institutions, and the communities that might receive the technology. And it means sort of different mixing of monies, people who pay for training and the kinds of facilities you need for training, but also for new technology, because that's not just a classroom, right, or a standard laboratory, and proximity, right? So we have to either pay for kids to travel from the regions where it'll be deployed, or, you know, pay other people. So that's an idea that I think is needed, but we don't have programs that would fund something like that, and I'm pretty sure that some of the rules wouldn't accommodate that for government dollars.
Pat, do you want to go into what Mary?
I think partners are at the key of it, and also trusted partnerships that are long-term, right, where you sort of break down the boundaries between the university and the private sector and labs for that matter. That's where experimentation occurs, exactly to what you were saying, Pat. And I think the more we can sort of build these out intentionally in a long-term trusted way, I think innovation will thrive and go forward. And that means we have to be able to fund an environment where we try many things. A lot of them fail, but a few successes really become self-sustaining, and they use market forces to drive that forward. And I think none of us have really found a way to quite do that, because not only should we partner to drive innovation, we should be able to fail and acknowledge that and come up with something new. So those kinds of trusted spaces, I think if we can get ahead of it, I think as a nation, I think we'll be leading the charge, because I don't think anyone's done it.
You've heard me harp on workforce development needs, and given another half hour, I would preach about The need for America to repair the harm that has been done to too many places and people, and most specifically in the large swaths of nearly every city that have been strategically discriminated against and disinvested. People live in those neighborhoods. The next whiz-bang, great innovation, fabulous idea could come from a kid growing up in one of those neighborhoods. Are we going to give that kid a chance? What does success look like? Success looks like every child in this country growing up in a mixed income neighborhood of choice with that opportunity to be the next person sitting in this room a decade, 2 decades from now. And so it is about partnership. And with this room and with my organization, I feel like it's about a new era of town and gown. We've got to come together to figure out these big, difficult problems. We've proven over the last couple of years we can make big investments. We can still do that in America. Now we just got to keep it going. We've got to prove of concept and we got to roll. And so I think it is an exciting time for us to lead, to press into 2024 and beyond because we've got the momentum.
I want to thank my panel. I have many takeaways, but one I'll just pull out because it does relate to one of the reasons why we're here at Davis. It's this idea about new models that you mentioned, Pat, and I think all of the rest of you have also tapped in. We have working groups, so we're meeting later this afternoon and tomorrow. I think Deborah and I would love to challenge everyone when you're in your working group, not just to think about maybe a cool idea or recommendation, but couple that with, well, what would the model look like? How would you develop this recommendation? What would be its funding structure? What would be its governance structure? How would it? So let's stretch ourselves. And so I appreciate the panel for pushing us there. And I want everyone to give them a big applause. Okay, folks, we're going to break for lunch now. So thank you again, panelists. I've been asked to ask everyone to exit through that door. There's a buffet line that goes this way, and then you can find a place to sit. You can sit here. There's a ballroom next door with seating. I think the sun is shining in the courtyard. That might also be a nice place to sit and enjoy your lunch. And I would just ask that everyone be back here at 1:30 p.m.